It's a lot about like creating the rituals that mean a lot to us in terms of culture. That's why I named Art Tearapy after tea, because tea is such an integral part of being Chinese, like the Chinese culture.
Welcome to Stay Legendary, a podcast about showing up, being kind, and doing the work that matters. Enjoy, legends.
Hi, my name is Su Mei. Art therapy is a form of psychotherapy, and it uses the methods of mainly visual art, drawing, painting, sculpting, collage, and all other kinds of visual art forms to help people process their grief, trauma, difficulties, mental illness, disabilities through the form of creating art and creativity. And there are other forms of creative arts as well, which are music, dance, drama, and their own forms of creative arts therapies as well. And we do touch on that in Art Tearapy with all our different creative arts therapists. But I specifically focus on visual arts as a form of arts therapy.
Amazing. So I guess where I'd love to start is if you can take us back to where art therapy all kind of started for you and how you knew that this was what you were meant to be doing.
So when I was a kid, I never was really into art at all. I was more of a sports person, athlete when I was a kid. I used to play a lot of basketball when I was young. And when I was 15, I left my country and went to the UK. And there was a lot of challenges for me, having left my country at a relatively young age. And I did art as a form of one of the subjects that I did in school. And I ended up loving art because art actually helped me process a lot of kind of struggles that I was going through as a young teenage girl in a new country. So like the feelings of isolation, the feelings of like perhaps bullying and being away from my family, being plucked away from my culture, having to navigate a new culture, which was the colonial culture. It helped me a lot during that time. So I was always searching for a way of like expressing myself through arts as a career, but I never really found it till much later on in life because I never knew that there was a thing called art therapy. And I did architecture at first, and I really did not enjoy architecture because architecture was about like designing beautiful buildings and spaces. And I didn't really care about how the shell of a building looked like. I was more concerned about what was happening inside and what was happening inside people that was in those buildings. And I ended up co-founding an NGO, going to Bolivia and Uganda to build buildings for orphanages in those countries, and also started to run art workshops for the kids in those orphanages. And it was at that time that I realized I really needed to work more with people rather than with buildings or with computers, with like AutoCAD and that kind of thing. So much later on, I was actually diagnosed with bipolar disorder because I got really involved with political movements back in Malaysia. During that time, there was a lot of corruption. There was a lot of unhappiness that was happening in the country. And I got involved with the political movements, and it actually caused me quite a lot of mental instability. And I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder, having like high mania and low depression. And I was hospitalized. And in one of the hospitals, I discovered art therapy. And it was there that I realized there was this kind of field called art therapy, and I started searching for it. And much later on, when I was in a much more stable place, I eventually came to Australia 10 years after I left England. I came to Australia to pursue a master's of art therapy. And from then I graduated. I started my private practice. I worked as a support coordinator, and I also worked as a family therapist while I built my private practice. And 5 years later, I went full-time into art therapy. And yeah, art therapy is a lot about warmth and connection and having a cup of tea while connecting with people. And that's how I became an art therapist.
That's amazing. So like, obviously, Sue, we know each other on a personal level, but I already know so much more about you just from that first question that I never knew before. And I think that like gives us so much more insight because you can approach things from a lens of lived experience and knowing what things were meaningful and most impactful to you in terms of that human connection and the importance of that when we are going through hardships. And especially, I really love that you have this insight around that experience as someone who comes from a completely different culture or background.
I think for me, it was a lot about like creating the rituals that mean a lot to us in terms of culture. That's why like I named Art Tearapy after tea, because like tea is such an integral part of being like, you know, Chinese, like the Chinese culture. Most of the teas in the world, actually all the teas in the world came from China. The plant, not the different cultures of the teas. Yeah.
So I'd love if you could tell me what you think like one thing is that people always get wrong about art therapy.
Not so much in Australia, because I feel like in Australia, or at least Melbourne, people know this. But like, what for someone who probably hasn't heard of art therapy before, they think that the art therapist interprets the drawing for them. Mm-hmm. So like, imagine someone's done like a drawing, and then they would think that me as the art therapist would have the ability to kind of like tell them what the meaning of the drawing is. We would never put our own meaning or interpretation on another person's artwork. We would be able to guide them just as like counselors or psychologists be able to like talk and ask open-ended questions. And we have the skills to be able to get people to derive the meaning for themselves from their own artwork rather than telling them what the artwork means. And that is one special thing about art therapy, because like we would never tell someone how they feel or what their drawing means or what the colors or the marks or anything on the artwork kind of represents that way. So that is something that's not well known in terms of art therapy.
Yeah, because I know that like I put a question out to the team as well, where I said, you know, I'm going to be speaking to you, and I wanted to know if anyone had specific questions, and a lot of it was about them wanting greater clarity and insight into what exactly art therapy is and how, as an art therapist, you're able to measure progress or change or improvement or just use a point of measure. Because with any therapy, particularly operating within the NDIS world, a lot of it is on reporting on progress and on whether there has or hasn't been improvement. And so how, basically, I suppose this is a two-pronged question. The first part being, how would you put in layman's terms, how would you describe art therapy? And then subsequent to that, how would you be able to, again, in very plain language, explain to everyone how, as an art therapist, you're able to then measure progress for someone with their art therapy?
Okay, so I have a very simple answer for the second one, but I think I already explained it earlier about how I put in layman terms how to explain what art therapy is. And it is that art is a form of psychotherapy that uses drawing, painting, sculpting, or collage. And it also can use dance, drama, and music to help people process their grief, trauma, and physical, intellectual, or psychosocial disabilities, and as well as challenges in life through art making and creativity. It can be cathartic experience, and it can help them relax and be mindful and find insight at the same time.
Awesome.
And in terms of how you measure, we have a lot of measuring assessments and measurement tool. We assess with like materials. Different materials have different qualities and that kind of thing. But like in terms of progress, we would do it as though how any therapist would do it. If you're measuring, for example, not every art therapist does that, but like we can give people scales. You know, like if people like work on scales, like measure like on a scale of 0 to 10, how distressing does that experience feel for them? And then they mention that. And after the art therapy session goes over, at the end of the session, we can do like on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel now? Then they explain, and most of the time it's kind of like reduced quite significantly. And then we can use those scales like at the start and the end of finish. So that's like just a very simple way of doing it. But in art therapy, we have like so many skills. We have like being able to kind of assess people's safety by like a drawing of a house, tree, and a person, you know? Being able to assess how much safety they feel, how much support they are having, and how they see themselves. But the problem with art therapy is that most of the experience is measured qualitatively. So like we write in stories and that kind of thing. But like my NDIS report has like a quantitative measure as well, because I understand people like to look at quantitative measures. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like just like assessing like on a scale of 1 to 10, how do they feel now? At the beginning of 5 sessions, how do they feel? At the end of the 5 sessions, how do they feel? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. That was the perfect explanation, because I think we're always wondering that, and it kind of segues into the next part, which is speaking about the NDIS and their expectations and reporting and all of that.
I also wanted to say that I have used specific psychological measures like the BACs, the zones, that kind of thing. Like you can still use that with art therapy just to measure how people are feeling, whether they're feeling suicidal, whether they're feeling calm, whether they're feeling that kind of thing. You can still use those things to measure. It doesn't take away from what art therapists are doing.
Yeah. And I think that I would love to know what you think probably the most powerful part is. But for me, for art therapy, I love having these creative and alternative therapies as options. I find them to be the most successful when we're working with participants, particularly younger participants, right? Like talk therapy just isn't for everyone. And so whenever we do quite a bit of work with youth and adolescents, and I think when we frame it like, oh, you're going to speak to an occupational therapist or a psychologist or something, there's usually some resistance. Whereas I find with a creative therapy like art therapy, it can usually be reframed as something more engaging and creative, obviously, but more so just as an activity and a practice, right? Yep. And there isn't this inherent expectation of you need to be able to answer questions in a set way. And obviously other therapies are a bit more adaptive, but I do just find it lands best with the younger community that tends to be resistant of therapies, right? So what do you think the superpower of art therapy is? Because that's my perception of it with the client base that we work with, but I would love to hear from you what you think art therapy's superpower is.
I think art therapy's superpower is the fact that we can have a conversation, have communication, and it doesn't have to revolve around talking. Because like it can be nonverbal, and you say that it works best with young people. Yes, it does work well with young people, but I think it works really well with like people of all ages, especially, and most of the time people who are older, they come to art therapy after like all the other therapies that they've worked with hasn't worked. Then they come to me and then they say like, oh, and all the other therapies haven't worked. I haven't gelled with any of the other therapists or anything like that. I need something different. And then they come to us and then it's like kind of like magical that it starts working and stuff like that. And it doesn't have to be that way, because art therapy can be a mainstream thing that people access just like counseling or psychotherapy or psychologist, and it can just work just as well, because like we're trained in talk therapy and like nonverbal parts of therapies. With art therapy, to be able to like integrate nonverbal stuff, like I work with clients who, obviously I work with verbal clients as well predominantly, but I work with like completely nonverbal clients as well. So that is like a huge superpower for art therapy to have, because like so many other therapies can't do that. And a lot of the time, even when someone is able to verbalize themselves, especially with like trauma or mental illness, it's actually quite tiring and re-traumatizing for them to like, we have to retell their story again and again and again verbally. And it like, we say it's like in their head. But then like if they're able to like bring it down to like creating some art, making something or writing something or creating something, it is actually a hugely cathartic and expressive releasing process for them to be able to go through, which doesn't have to involve them even sharing their story. Sometimes imagine if someone doesn't want to share their story, someone wants to keep it. We don't have to know explicitly what is happening with all their secrets and everything like that to be able to have a therapeutic effect on someone. That is something that's hugely very powerful.
Yeah, that's huge. I think that's a great point. Because like, especially when we're working with multidisciplinary teams, if every single therapist is asking for this backdrop, tell me your story, tell me the history, tell me what, a lot of the time you're digging into someone's past trauma. And so then for the participant at the center of this to be just rehashing and going over the same story over and over again. And like we know as well in this space and in this industry, there's quite high churn in a lot of domains and a lot of therapies as well. And so with that means that the participants frequently having to go through that rapport building phase with a number of people and just having to relive that trauma every single time they're asked to rehash and give that background and context. And so I think that's huge. That is huge, like what you've touched on there. And I think that's what is most upsetting for me. We're still in a bit of a limbo phase, but I would love to pick your brain and get your insight on this. But in terms of the NDIS and creative therapies at the moment, I know this is the most frequent question that I'm getting from our team. But it's a very prevalent point of contention and like discussion in the space at the moment. So what's your take on where things are headed in the moment with the current sort of NDIS reform and creative therapies?
So I feel like obviously I don't have insight as to where it's headed, apart from, I don't know if you're up to date with what's the latest. But the latest is that there has been a document of a review that had been last year that states that art therapy is useful for like autism and then not so much for cerebral palsy and not so much for PTSD and useful for something else and not so useful for other things. But like there were a lot of things that were saying that it wasn't kind of like enough evidence for. So that's where we're at the moment. The current climate in, Australia is that, things are quite challenging for the government, I would say. And like there's a lot of cuts that have been made like all over, not just the NDIS. I've also been hearing from my EAP work that there's been a lot of public funding cut for like the public servants and stuff like that. So it's like all around, like everywhere in Australia, it's just like trying to save money, basically. And NDIS is not short of them. It's hard because like it's, people's health and mental health and disability, and a lot of them rely on art therapy. But I would say like if art therapy gets cut from the NDIS, I don't think it will get cut from the NDIS. They've already said that art therapy and music therapy will stay in the NDIS. It's just like how much we're going, like the art therapists might have to take a cut in terms of how much the hourly rate is, maybe, I guess. But I come from a country where there's no funding for art therapy at all. And we're still offering it. Like I might be going back in May, and I went back a few months ago, and there has been projects that have been put out for youth to allow them to access art therapy for free and stuff like that. So I just think we're going to have to be a lot more creative and a lot more resourceful with how we, offer our services and do that. Like I've already started a program where I offer like $30 low-cost art therapy services from my placement students to give to the community. And like I know that's not a sustainable thing for art therapists to do, but like we're going to have to be a lot more creative with how we are able to fund art therapy and provide services, and how people will have to find ways if they really want to, find art therapy, they will find a way to get it, I believe.
And I think that's probably the most disappointing part, because like you've applied the lens of, you come from a country that it's not even accessible. But then I also, if it's framing it as, there may need to be a cut in the price guide as the maximum hourly rate that can be charged for these creative therapies. I mean, as qualified art therapist, you have been through all of the required tertiary education to obtain your master's degree as an art therapist. So it's a bit skewed in that way, where I think that's what's questionable and most disappointing, because we're getting a lot of like generalization being thrown across the board in terms of what isn't beneficial and helpful as a capacity building therapy to participants. And you have been through all of the necessary tertiary education to be able to deliver services as a qualified therapist, right? So it's not like you are working under the guise or some loophole in the NDIS, which we know is rampant. There are many, many loopholes, but that's not the case with art therapy and qualified therapists. And yeah, I think that's probably the trickiest part at the moment, is also that there's just so much uncertainty and ambiguity around it, because so many people actually depend on this support and depend on these therapies. So to have it just be so up in the air right now is quite disappointing, I would say. But you're right in that there are a number of cuts across the board, and I'm grasping at straws here in terms of my recall of the exact figures. But I had an NDIS complaints officer, one who was absolutely fantastic. I will never forget this conversation that I had with her, because she just let me in on all of the inside scoop and information. But she was basically like, the NDIS went from an estimation when the scheme initially rolled out, where they had a projection that there would be enough funding for the scheme to last, I think it was like 113 years or something like that. And now with where we're currently at, it's come back to like there's only enough funding for the next 30-something years. And so that's why they're now having to really tighten things up. But a lot of that is as a result of the fraud. And she did tell me as well that 96% of all of the fraud is service provider facilitated. Only 4% is through the participants. But then who pays the price for all of this is the participants, the end user that this scheme is actually there and purpose built around. It's the end user, and they're the ones that are the most impacted by all of these changes and by all the ambiguity that comes around it as well, as a result of people misusing the scheme and taking advantage of it, which is really quite sad.
Yeah. It's hard because, like, you know, when people commit fraud and stuff, I can't imagine many of them have been like art therapists, because we make up such a small percentage of, you know, the like even therapy group. And I wonder, like, if they're really trying to cut the funding, why do they have to cut it from like one particular group of therapy? Why can't they just cut it across the board and then like ask people to choose what kind of therapy? Because like there's no one's gonna be like seeing like so many different therapists at one time. They can choose which therapists they want to like allocate their funding to at the end of the day. Yeah, so it's hard not to take it personally. And I know a lot of art therapists, and I don't know about music therapists, but like they are taking it quite personally. They think like they feel very undervalued. They feel like our profession is not valued. They're going to like train as other professions and stuff like that. But like for me personally, like I know you've heard my story about how I got into art therapy. It's a very strong, compelling one that I truly believe in the powers of art therapy. And even if I don't have NDIS funding, I will not stop being an art therapist. I will still continue to, you know, do what I do and raise the funds myself. I used to raise funds myself for the charity anyway. So we'll be able to do it somehow. So it's hard when a small group of people end up like misusing the system, and then like other people having to like take the brunt for it.
Yeah, I think that's it's so disappointing, because there is a select group that is being punished for the actions of others. I totally appreciate where you're coming from with that. And again, like, it's how many question marks have there been in the past around what the NDIS will and won't fund, and what will and won't continue to be a funded support. I know there's been question marks and still a lot of uncertainty around the future of even support coordination. And I think all of that uncertainty creates so much internal distress for so many people. It's not just the participants, it's service providers that have come into the space with heart, and that with the intention of genuinely being there to make a difference. It's not that people like you and I start our businesses because we're like, oh, we're going to create world peace and we're going to heal everything that's wrong in the world. And we have the power to fix everything for everyone, you know, but it's coming into it with the intention of at least being able to make some measurable impact in at least one person's life, for there to be just so much uncertainty around our ability to continue to do that in a meaningful way and in a way that we are equipped to do so. And we have that skill set, that in a way, like we've acquired the skill set over the years and refined it so that we can serve these people, so that then the unknown of our future to be able to continue to serve our community is huge. It's huge. And I can completely understand where you're coming from with it. But I just love that you're in it regardless. Like, it doesn't matter where the funding is coming from. And so many people can't say that, you know? I did want to ask you, is there something in particular, is there something that you wish more support coordinators knew about art therapy? You have a really unique lens where, like, you have the experience in the past as a support coordinator, but also as an art therapist, but also as a registered NDIS provider as an art therapist. So I would love to hear your insight, because very few people would have all of that knowledge base to reflect on.
I think with art therapy, I would like support coordinators to know that it's not just effective for children, actually. It is really effective form of therapy all across the board. I would like a support coordinator to refer clients to me before they've gone through like all the other options. And not be the last point of contact. Because like, if we are the last point of contact, it shows that like we are actually really, you know, a powerful form of therapy, you know?
Yeah.
We would be able to help a participant much more effectively if they were referred to us earlier on in their journey in their mental health or disability.
I totally agree, because we have, obviously, what I touched on earlier, we have a lot of young kids that we work with, but we have a number of clients that currently do use art therapy that are adults as well, and of varied backgrounds, both culturally and then also in terms of their diagnoses and their support needs and their capacity, right? Verbal, non-verbal, like there's a whole spectrum of participants that are currently engaged with art therapy. And we are actually seeing that despair around all of this ambiguity as a direct result of that. And it's really quite sad, because, like you said, a lot of other therapies just don't work. And so once they have found one that does work, and then they're being told that this may not be able to continue for you because of your diagnosis or something, all of this labeling and kind of putting people into boxes is you're defining someone by something that isn't, they're not objective measures, firstly, but they're also not something that they have directed themselves. And we know ourselves best and our unique experiences best. And we know, for instance, even just us knowing how to, for myself, even in the last few years, I've had to learn different strategies and ways for my own emotional regulation, and knowing how to be introspective in a way that is more uplifting and positive, as opposed to introspective with like a critical lens, right? And these are things that only I can do, and the ways that I may be able to emotionally regulate myself could be completely different to the way you do it. And so then if someone were to come and tell me like, no, this is wrong and you can't do it this way anymore, and so to feel better moving forward, you need to do it that way because you fall into this box, it's incredibly demoralizing, I think. Yeah. But I am hopeful that with voices like yours in the space, and with people just advocating for this and being incredibly loud about it, like we need to be vocal about it, and advocating for a true sense of choice and control in how people access and use their therapies is the best way to at least approach this for the best possible outcome in this situation. Do you have any suggestions for ways that people can integrate this into their relationships in a way that is going to be powerful, but to also allow more closeness and like tighten that bond in the relationship?
I think like even on a piece of paper, just like taking turns to draw, like within a family, you can do it with a family of 5, even like everyone have a piece of paper, draw, scribble, pass it on to the next person on your right, draw something, pass it on, draw something, pass it on until the whole page is full. That is something we do in groups and with families and stuff. If you wanted it to be a bit more constrained, you can do it in a mandala. So in a circular shape, like start in the middle and then like come up to another layer, another person adds another layer, another person adds another layer. Yeah, so that's a mandala. Or if you're doing it with kids, You can draw a face and then fold the paper and draw the neck, fold the paper, draw the shoulders, fold the paper, draw the stomach, fold the paper, draw the hips, fold the paper, draw the knees, fold the paper, draw the feet, fold the paper. And it doesn't have to be a human. It can be any kind of life form or anything like that. So that can be done in a group as well or a family.
I wanted to ask you, for anyone watching, that if they wanted to start art therapy today, but for instance, they weren't able to access it for whatever reason, and they just wanted to implement that practice at home by themselves, I think one of the immediate thoughts that people would have would be like, well, I don't have the supplies. And so a lot of the time we'll apply these expectations and think that we need all of the bells and whistles to just start a thing. And so I think even just the example that you've given is just talking really simple, like we're talking a piece of paper and, pen or pencil. But what would your advice or suggestion be for anyone that is wanting to, whether it's on an individual level or, in a group setting, that wanted to start implementing more art therapy sort of practices? Where would the immediate place you'd ask them, you'd suggest that they start? And how would they then know as they're doing it? For instance, that example you gave of like folding the paper and just drawing different pieces. How would they then be able to progress with that themselves and have an understanding of what they're doing for themselves? I don't know if I've asked that question in a way that makes sense.
You mean if they're doing it for themselves?
Yeah.
Without an art therapist?
Yeah, like if they just want to start without that, they won't, for instance, if they're not able to access it immediately, or if they just want to test out doing a more creative, emotional outlet, right? Or therapeutic outlet for themselves. Because you don't, like, they can just start off by
journaling.
Yeah.
Like journaling and visual journal. So like a visual journal is often very powerful. It's like it's something that people can do in their own time, just like buy a large journal, any size really, and then like start writing their day-to-day thoughts, like just kind of like word down if you have any kind of like things that happen in your day, like movie tickets or take any receipts or anything like that, like of things that are like very meaningful. You can like put it in there and then like do little sketches and that kind of thing, just to reflect on like your day and just like have something to, remember charting where you are at. And then in terms of like having a scale of like where you are going in terms of emotionally, you can have a gauge of like on a scale of 0 to 10, how you're feeling that day. And you can determine that scale yourself, whether it's like how distressed you feel that day or how happy you feel that day or how calm you feel that day. You determine what the scale means to you, and then you kind of like write that down each day as to how you're feeling that day. So that can be quite a good way of my journal.
Oh, I love that.
This is from my previous artwork that I did, where I collected newspapers from Malaysia about like the political climate and stuff like that. And This was stuff that I was involved in. This was the change in government, my grandfather. And then like different kind of writing, artwork, reading.
Oh, wow. Oh, I love that stress bucket. Just having like a visual. Yeah, I probably need to do something like that.
Yeah. This is the hero's journey. It's one of the tools that we use. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be like, perfect artwork. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the weirdest thing you've ever used in an art therapy session?
Art therapy or my own art?
Or either one.
I have used period blood.
Really?
Yep.
I'm guessing that was
you
your
can see
own.
On my website. That's my own art. My own art expression.
That's on your website?
Yeah. My personal art website.
Yeah. Okay, cool. We'll make sure to include links for all of that as well. And then if you could describe art therapy in 3 emojis, what would they be?
And then the palette, the art palette. And I didn't, but I just thought about the
all right, so
that emoji.
Heart emoji, and then the palette.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the rolling eye emoji.
I love that. All right. Those are three. I expected the first two, but that last one was good. That was a good wild card. Okay. And then if you were a crayon color, what would it be called?
Ruby red.
Ruby red. I like that.
You see all the red in my...
Yeah. Okay. And what does ruby red mean to you? Because you said there's all this red around, and you said before that red can mean passion, it can mean love, it can mean anger, it can mean all of these things. Does it evolve for you in its meaning? Or is it generally like more stagnant in terms of what it symbolizes for you personally?
It's mainly passion, like fiery passion.
I like that. So then the next thing is right along the vein of fiery passion. You wrote a poem that you wanted to share. So I wanted to ask if you were happy to read it for us, and then also just tell us what inspired it for you.
Okay. So this poem was written on the idea of like, I realized even though I've been creating art for a long time before I was an art therapist, I struggled getting into a creative profession because I never wanted to start selling and commercializing my artwork because it just didn't sit well with me. I just couldn't do it. And this is the reason why I have steered away from that and become a therapist that uses art as a way of helping others process their artwork by getting them to make art instead of like me making art and like selling my art for money. It's called Selling My Heart. If you ever wondered why my art is not for sale, it is because my heart is not for sale. A creation which is an extension from the depths of my arteries, spreading to the expression of society. I don't care about perfecting my technique and for people to give me applause because it is for a much larger cause. The cause is for my peace. The cause is for my sanity. The cause is there to rejuvenate and not deplete me. I've studied artists and musicians who have aimed for recognition, only to burn out, to be used and abused. The truth is that good art bores me. Bad art and raw art truly excites me. It is art from the heart. So excuse me while I tell my story, and even if it doesn't go down in history, it would not make a difference to me because I am an artist till the day I die, a quest to heal and fulfill my desires in the pursuit of making our world brighter without selling my heart.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. That's amazing. I really love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Because again, I think it just goes to show your intention in this space and like what you want your presence in this space to be there for and what your intention is in this space. And I just love that. Yeah, that was so powerful. Okay. I've kept you like for so long, so I'm going to wrap things up, I promise. But if you could speak directly to the people designing the NDIS reforms, what would you want them to understand about the role of creative therapies?
I think I mentioned it before, that if creative therapies are there for people who have tried so many forms of mainstream therapy and we're the last point of call, why don't put us first? You know, why don't put us in with those other forms of therapies? Because like we are effective as them. Yeah. And I would like to just this is something that perplexes me about the NDIS because like, you know, the NDIS, we get that you need to make cuts. We get that you need to save money and we are not discounting you from that. But why does it have to only be, you know, certain professions that are like doing so much for the people that really need it? They're cutting budget. Why not give people the choice of if they need to choose between the different types of therapies, why not give them the options of what's already there for them already? Then they can choose what they need. Like if they need to spend less, have less sessions on that kind of thing, why not give them the options to do that? It wouldn't make a huge difference if people have like 5 sessions less a year or like in 2 years or something like that, but like still have the option to access the things that they choose to want to access.
Yeah. And directly in line with choice and control, right? That's what this whole thing is built around. So I couldn't have said that better myself.
Because it's going to put a big strain on those other therapists that are only there. There's going to be a shortage and there's going to be long wait lists and that kind of thing. And we've seen that as support coordinators.
Yeah. And not only that, then there's so much demand on like so many of those therapists are under the pressure of constant like assessment report writing. And like we're now almost void of actual therapeutic engagement. You know, it's become so transactional in the sense that we need more evidence that you need this funding and this support. So in the meantime, we're going to use your current funding to go and get more evidence of why you need it moving forward. And that's going to be another assessment and report, instead of it being you actually sitting down and talking to your therapist, or you sitting down and doing some whatever activity it is and engaging in that therapy as a therapy. The last question that I wanted to ask you, what is your vision? What is your mission? And what gets you up every morning and doing what you are doing every day?
I feel like I'm living it. I'm living my dream. I'll tell you what my week looks like, or going to be looking like. I'm working at a school 1.5 days a week, working with teenagers, doing individuals and groups. I have like a handful of NDIS clients that I still work with, and I just love working together with them. And I do like EAP, so I work in like the workspace to provide employment assistance to them. That's through like the other private practice that I work with, Polar Practice, which I love working with. And I'm going to be volunteering for the Asylum Seekers Resource Center, providing art therapy to the asylum seekers and refugees there. So like, I feel like I love doing this.
You're living your vision. You're living your mission.
I'm literally living my vision that I had in mind when I first embarked on this journey to become a creative arts therapist.
Oh man, that's unreal. That's amazing. That's what we all strive for. And honestly, Sue, like I feel so privileged that I got to speak to you today, but I feel even more honored that I get to call you a friend. You genuinely inspire me in a way that I can't articulate. Because when I speak to you, like we don't have to constantly be speaking every day. We can speak in different ways and across all of the different platforms that we speak or when we see each other. But every single way, you come with pure authenticity. And I never have to wonder when it comes to you. And I just love that. And I love that there is a you in this space. And there is a you as a voice for the creative therapies. And a lot of the time, the voice for the voiceless, and all of this work that you're doing, you're incredible. And I just absolutely adore you and absolutely adore everything that you stand for. And I feel so, so privileged to call you my friend. So thank you so, so much. I just want to ask you, where can people connect with you or learn more about you and your work? And then we're obviously going to put links to everything, but just give us a quick sum up of where people can find out more about you and connect with you if they want.
On socials, I'm mainly on Instagram, art.tearapy, and website is arttearapy.com. And then if you're interested in my art, my personal art page is tansumei.com.
Thank you so, so much, Sue. And for anyone listening, if this conversation sparked anything for anyone, I am imploring you to get out there and to be a voice and to advocate for the ongoing place that all creative therapies need and have in this space. Please spread the word and actually go out there and support every single thing that Sue's doing. I couldn't think of anyone more in line with values aligned with ours, but also that's just more deserving of recognition of the amazing work that you do. So I absolutely adore you. I adore everything you do. And thank you so, 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 so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. If you or someone you care about needs support, you can always find us at knowledgetraysupport.com.au. Stay legendary.